Episode 4. Dangerous Curiosity. Morning arrived too quickly. Lena woke before her alarm, her mind already racing through everything that had happened the night before. For a moment she lay still in bed, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, listening to the faint sounds of the city waking outside. The contract sat on her kitchen counter where she had left it when she returned home. $20,000 a month. She still could not fully process it. The number felt unreal, but the memory of Adrian Vals's steady gaze across the table was very real. There had been something unusual about that meeting, something that stayed with her long after she left the tower. Most wealthy executives she had interviewed in the past tried to control conversations carefully. They dodged difficult questions and surrounded themselves with people who protected their image. Adrian Voss had done the opposite. He had invited her in. That alone made Lena suspicious. Curiosity was one thing, trust was another, and Lena had learned a long time ago that powerful men rarely offered access without expecting something in return. She pushed the thought aside and forced herself out of bed. By the time she finished getting dressed and made a quick cup of coffee, her phone vibrated on the counter. A message from Marcus Haley. Car will arrive at 8:30. Lena glanced at the clock. 8:05. Efficient indeed. She finished her coffee and gathered her bag, slipping a notebook and recorder inside. Old habits from journalism were not easy to break. Before leaving, she hesitated for a moment. Then she opened her laptop and typed 2 words into the search bar. Adrian Voss. Dozens of articles appeared instantly. Technology magazines praised him as a visionary. Business journals described him as ruthlessly strategic. One financial blog called him the most disciplined corporate strategist of the last decade. Lena leaned back slightly in her chair. None of the articles mentioned anything personal. No scandals. No emotional stories. Nothing messy. For a man that powerful, the absence of controversy was almost suspicious. You're hiding something, she murmured to herself. Not corruption. She had seen that before. This felt different, more controlled, more deliberate. If Adrian expected her to write an honest memoir, she intended to uncover everything that mattered. She closed the laptop and headed out the door. At exactly 8:30. A black car waited outside her building. The same quiet driver from the night before we opened the door. The ride across the city felt different in daylight. Morning traffic filled the streets, and sunlight reflected off the tall glass buildings in the financial district. Voss Tower looked even more imposing under the bright sky. When Lena stepped into the lobby, Marcus was already waiting. He greeted her with a polite nod. Good morning, Miss Moretti. Good morning, Marcus. I trust you slept well. Eventually, Marcus gestured toward the elevators. Mr. Voss is already in his office. They stepped inside the elevator together. As the doors closed, Lena turns slightly toward him. Does he always start his workday this early? Marcus pressed the familiar button near the top of the panel. Mr. Voss rarely stops working. That sounds exhausting for most people. Yes. The elevator moved upward smoothly. Within moments, the doors opened again. The office looked different in daylight. Sunlight poured through the massive windows, filling the space with pale gold light. The polished floors reflected the skyline, and the distant movement of cars below looked almost unreal from this height. From here, the city seemed small. Controlled. Which somehow suited Adrian Voss perfectly. He stood near the center of the room this time, reviewing something on a tablet. He looked up as they approached. Good morning, Lena. The way he said her name sounded natural, as if he had already grown comfortable using it. Good morning, Shay replied. Marcus stepped aside quietly. Adrian placed the tablet down on a nearby desk. I hope the drive here was comfortable. It was. Good. He gestured toward the seating area near the windows. Shall we begin? Lena sat down, pulling her notebook from her bag. Adrian watched the motion with interest. You still use paper? I find it helps me think. A writer who prefers analog tools, he said thoughtfully. That seems rare these days. So does a billionaire who wants to tell the truth about himself. Adrian smiled slightly. Fair point. He sat across from her. Where would you like to start? He asked. Lena clicked her pen. Your childhood? Adrian's expression shifted slightly. That is direct. You said you hired me for honesty. Yes, I did. Then we begin at the beginning. For a moment, he seemed to consider the request. Then he leaned back slightly in his chair. I was born in a small town outside Milan, he said. Not exactly the origin story people expect from a technology billionaire. Lena began writing quickly. Your parents? My father was an engineer. My mother was a mathematics teacher. That explains the technical background, partly. Adrian paused briefly before continuing. My father believed very strongly in discipline. Lena glanced up. That sounds ominous. It was not unpleasant, Adrian said calmly, but it was strict. She continued writing. Did you always plan to build a company like Voss Dynamics? No. What did you plan to do? For a while I believed I would become a physicist. That surprised her. What changed? Adrian's eyes shifted toward the window for a moment. Opportunity. That is vague. I prefer to explain things in order. Lena smiled slightly. That is fair. For the next hour, their conversation moved steadily through pieces of Adrian's early life. His education, his early interest in technology, the first company he started during university. The more he spoke, the more Lena realized something. Adrian Voss was extremely careful with information, not dishonest, but selective. He revealed details slowly, choosing each one with precision. Eventually, Lena closed her notebook. That is enough for today. Adrian raised an eyebrow. You are stopping already? Good interviews require time to process. He studied her thoughtfully. You are observing me. Of course I am. That is not unusual for journalists. No. She held his gaze. But I suspect most of the people around you are not observing you honestly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Adrian smiled again. A little more noticeably this time. That he said quietly is exactly why I hired you. Lena slipped her notebook back into her bag. You realize this arrangement will require trust. Yes. And trust usually works both ways. Adrian stood from his chair. You will have access to much of my professional life during the writing process. That is already unusual. I believe it will make the book stronger. He walked toward the windows. Lena followed a moment later. The view from the tower was breathtaking. Cars moved like small pieces across the streets far below. For a few seconds they stood beside each other in silence. Then Adrian spoke again. Tell me something, Lena. She looked at him. Yes? What made you become a journalist? The question caught her off guard. You are not the only one being studied here, he added. She considered the question carefully. Because I hate lies, she said. Finally, Adrian nodded slowly. That explains a great deal. Their eyes met briefly, and Lena had the strange feeling that the story she had agreed to write might turn out to be far more complicated than she expected. But she also realized something else. Adrian Voss had become very curious about her. And curiosity, she knew, could be dangerous.